Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Habitly.com, where you can learn the habits of highly successful people. All of us have a behavior that could be better. All of us have behaviors that are strengths. We want to build on the strengths and deal with the ones that are weaknesses. Check it out, Habitly.com. It's simple, it's easy, it's fun, and it's very low cost. Now, today's episode is with Helen Fanucci. She is an MIT-trained engineer who's now a best-selling author of the book, Love Your Team, a survival guide for sales managers in a hybrid world. She has 17 crucial conversations that you should be having with your people as a manager, particularly if you're a sales manager. And she kind of walks through things. By the way, she's also a sales leader at Microsoft. So she knows what she's talking about. Let's dive in so you can learn from it. Helen, I need to ask you, you are an MIT-trained engineer, but then you're now an expert on loving a sales team. How does an MIT-trained engineer go into sales? I thought it was the people who couldn't attend MIT went into sales.
Funny. Well, I started my career as an engineer working for IBM in Silicon Valley. And about a year or so into it, I wanted to be out with customers, helping them use technology rather than in the back office. And I was able to, through my network, because frankly, my engineering manager didn't really have a big network at IBM. So I was able to get connected with a marketing organization at IBM that was looking for engineers, believe it or not, to help market CAD/CAM products, computer-aided design products to engineers. So maybe it was luck of timing, but I moved into that role and then went through IBM's sales training, which at that point was 18 months long. And so I was doing my day job and the sales training, and then I went into a sales territory in Silicon Valley, and it's just kind of evolved from there. I've had lots of different roles, some sales, some marketing leadership. I ran Sun Microsoft's executive briefing center and had a team of 40 people between Menlo Park and Europe. So I've done a lot of different things, but it's always been with a common theme of customer facing, field facing, because I find that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's super interesting. Because if we're not selling anything and if we're not being relevant to customers, nothing else works.
I don't want to go down a rabbit trail, but it was great to hear you say that in those days, IBM, the sales training was 18 months.
It was.
I remember the days when, I knew people that were joining IBM and Xerox, because that was kind of like their MBA. Graduate from college and then go to work for IBM to learn what it's like to be in a real business. And then 5 years, 10 years later, you either choose to stay there or you move on, but you got this fantastic education from the company. Not many companies do that anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Also at that time, IBM had this notion of employment for life, and that went out the window as well, because that's not sustainable. Lou Gerstner came in, a lot of things changed. But so we would go to, for me, go to Dallas for 3 weeks at a time or 4 weeks at a time, and then go back to our office and do homework in between. And in fact, one of the gals that I met through that training program, I'm still best friends with today.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, and when you went into that type of sales, it's interesting to me that they paired you up with really your strength. So you were a tech, basically you were an engineer, and then you were out selling to, or another word to use is helping engineers understand what your company was offering. And you could do that because you sound like you're an honest person and somebody they would trust, not only because of your behavioral style, but also you actually had the technical background. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. And also IBM really trains you well for understanding computing architectures And so when I was doing CAD CAM marketing to engineers, that was, pretty comfortable conversations. And then when I had my own territory, I sold the whole product line from databases to mainframes and what have you, working for tech companies because I was in Silicon Valley.
Well, now you have written this book called Love Your Team, a survival guide for sales managers in a hybrid world.
Right.
And what are you doing differently with your approach with this Love Your Team? What led you to write that? It makes it sound like you think people aren't loving on their team well enough, which I think is true.
Yeah. So it's okay. So I've been managing remote teams for hybrid teams for 25 years. And actually, my husband, who's a CEO of a tech company, he and I met in 2019. And during COVID, he started to hear how I manage my team. And he's like, that's really different. I thought that sales management was you hire people, you put them in a territory and they work out or they don't. And my focus has always been about empowering my team to be successful because I'm only as successful as my team members are. And so I built a system on how I do that. And I've also been on the receiving end of not such great sales leadership, sales management. And so I felt like I had a different approach. And I also did a keynote in July of 2021 and about retaining talent for sales leaders. Because, there were 4 million people resigning every month in the US. And when I talked about retaining top talent, I thought, oh, what do I put on the slide? Support your team, care for your team. And I put love your team. And I got to tell you, I was nervous, super nervous to use the love word in a business context at my first in-person conference. But then I talked about what that meant. And I got such great reception. And people then asked for more details about, okay, so now what do you actually do? And what I realized as I reflected is what I actually do is I have conversations with my team. And I guess, being the engineer that I am, I started using myself as a guinea pig and I recorded on, a sheet of paper, or a spreadsheet actually, because I'm a rows and columns kind of gal. The kinds of conversations I had with my team and how much time I spent. And I consolidated that into 17 critical conversations that sales leaders need to have to build high-performing teams in today's world. And that's kind of the guts of the book.
So I was kind of rolling with you there, and I was triggered to remember a good friend of mine from years back, Mike Summershine, and Mike was an IBM guy. And he was my sales manager at one point, even though he was a good friend of mine. And he made the comment that, whenever I have a team, sales team, the way he was taught and what his experience was, I've got 30% that are high performers. You just let them run. What do you need from me? You go for it. I got 30% I got to work with and they'll make their numbers. And then I pretty much on a sales team, you have 30% that are going to struggle or you have to replace. It sounds like your approach is achieving better numbers than that. Am I right?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Because 30% not achieving their numbers is a fail. And yeah, it's not great. And the other thing is because of the complexity, and I'm talking about enterprise sales in my world, but because of the complexity of B2B sales with so many more decision makers on the buyer's side of the table, so to speak, even a really experienced, successful seller needs support to be successful. For example, a CFO at the buyer resigns, leaves, and a new CFO comes on board. How does that seller get a meeting with the CFO? Because sellers have a hard time traditionally getting in with senior executives. So who do we know on our side that knows, that CFO that we can, leverage to get a meeting? there's a whole strategy around building relationships with senior executives, broader relationships across an organization that often the seller needs help just strategizing and brainstorming. And I think that that's part of the role of a manager to help do that.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would agree. Let me bring it back to the start though.
Okay.
So I'm going to hire somebody for my sales team. What's your system going to teach me that's different? How I'm going to hire a salesperson, because my experience is, and I have what I feel is a great hiring system that I've developed. And I have a background in sales since I was 15 years old. So now I'm 65, too many years. But what are you doing differently on the front end? Because my experience, and I'm curious yours, is that, salespeople are the best in interviews because that's what they're taught to do, right? How to pose, how to be a poser, how to present, even sincerely. And how do you discern whether this person is really going to be a good fit on your team?
Yeah, there's a couple things I think about. So first, before anyone even gets into the interview, I think it behooves a sales manager to build a strong network and pipeline of talent through their network. So, okay, somebody gets into an interview cycle, behavioral-based questions, situational questions, also questions related to what their ambitions are, their aspiration, what success looks like for them. Historically, success was blow out my number, make quota. That's no longer the case. We have sellers, they want work-life balance. They want to be able to work remotely. They want to not have to come into an office. There's a lot of different kind of post-COVID expectations that employees have. And so you've got to understand what their motivations are and whether they're good fit for what you're doing in your company and the culture of your company. And, it's a judgment and an assessment, and nobody gets hiring right 100% of the time that I've ever seen. So you give it your best shot. And we also have kind of a panel of interviewers. So, different people are in that interview cycle.
But what's your hiring process for a salesperson? What do you walk them, from getting the resume, what process do you follow?
Well, my answer is going to be a big company Microsoft process. And that is a whole engine that we have. I mean, the engine's not actually up and running right now because we're not doing big volumes of hiring. But we have, so when we're doing big volumes of hiring, like we were in the fall, we have an interview cycle. We interview 6 people a day at once a week. Or actually, it depends. For my organization, and my peers, it's 6 people once a week. And we have interviewers from different parts of the organization. If an employee has a resume and they think someone's going to be a good fit, our recruiting team does the initial vetting and for an outside a Microsoft employee, but you're not going to provide that resume unless you think they're a good fit to begin with. We believe we need to have an always-on hiring machine, just like I believe an individual manager who's trying to build a bench needs to always be building a network and keeping a relationship warm with people who they think are going to be good talent to bring in, even if you don't have a job in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what's your onboarding process once you've made this decision and you're hiring and they're coming on board?
That's a great question. So what I do is I first of all assign a peer buddy to them. And, someone else who's a successful seller to be their kind of go-to buddy. And I give them basically a bunch of kind of foundational things that they need to get done, like access to, they have to go through some security access things to get access to all the tools and all that stuff. So the administrative stuff. And then we also have training in terms of content and training. But what we will typically do is have that seller start meeting their team and kind of piggybacking on sales calls with extended team members. And depending on their level of expertise or capability, because we have some more junior sellers that come on board and some more senior, kind of dictates how soon we kind of set them free. Now, as a manager, and I do this for everybody, whether they're new or not, setting clear outcome-based performance expectations is critical. So I'll usually have like a 30-day, here's what I'd like you to accomplish in 30 days, and then or 90 days for new sellers. And then over time, it will be kind of, these are your goals for the year, and then we'll do checkpoints.
Yeah. Yeah. So then that brings us to kind of the meat of your book is like love your team. So now they're part of your team, they're hired, they're onboarded. What are you doing that is the love your team system?
Yeah. So first of all, I pay attention to my team members, and first and foremost, so it's not about external to the customer. First and foremost, it's about the team and building a relationship. So if I'm taking on a brand new team, congratulations, I got a new job, and I'm meeting my team for the first time, and that's the first conversation chapter. How do you effectively introduce yourself to your team? Because a lot of managers do that in a terrible fashion or not effective, thinking it's about them. Well, it's actually about what your team needs to know about you to start to build a relationship and be effective working together. And it's your first opportunity to build trust and relationship, which is foundational and critical. And actually, it's also modeling the behavior that you expect your sellers to have with customers, building trust and relationship with customers. So to be a little bit more specific, I have 3 slides that I PowerPoint slides. It's usually a virtual call. And I talk about myself so they know a little bit about me and my career, my family, where I live, favorite food, what have you. My second slide is my management philosophy and what I care about. So I have that in the book and I have it laid out. So some things, for example, that are on that slide is team first, high performing, set clear expectations and goals, no surprises, things like that. And then my third slide is here's what you can expect moving forward. So I have a cadence of every other week for 30 minutes with each of my sellers. And the first one is just about getting to know them. They don't have to come prepared. And so, I talk about that and what my cadence is. But I also ask them what they want when I have the one-on-one, the first one-on-one, because some of them actually want to meet more frequently and some less frequently. And it's also situational in terms of like if they have a big deal that is going to expected to close within the next month or so, it could be that every week is really necessary and sometimes more frequently.
So you're saying you're meeting every other week, so biweekly,
Mm-hmm.
and for 30 minutes, how many people would you say is the maximum a manager should have?
15.
15?
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's about what I propose, it takes about 15% of a manager's time in a month with a 40-day work week. So the math in the book is based on a 12-person team because that's what I had at the time. Okay. So, your numbers may vary. I also, I feel like that's the foundational relationship touch point, and we have that on the calendar. But I also let my team that, I'm available for drive-bys. They can ping me. I'll get on the phone and talk with them, what have you. And then separately, I do pipeline reviews. That's a separate process, but that's also factored into the 15% of the time.
That sounds like a great rhythm with your people. And in those meetings or separate of those meetings, I'm going to go back to an earlier question. What are you really doing differently with the love your team approach than maybe somebody else? Because I really want to dive into that if we can.
Yeah. So I really focus on my team and finding out what they care about on their terms and then supporting them. So, for example, I have had sellers, they want to be a manager. That's their aspiration. So I do coaching. I have them shadow me. I have them do forecast calls on my behalf if I'm on vacation, and so that they get more experience and exposure. That's one example. I know a lot of managers are really just focused on the numbers and kind of pressuring their team to make sure they are delivering on that number. And I think that actually breaks down the relationship in a negative way between the seller and the manager. I want the sellers to tell me and feel comfortable that there won't be a consequence if they bring bad news to me. And then it gives me the opportunity to problem solve with them and figure out how to get the deal back on track. So it's really attending to their needs. There's a lot said about, well, we want to see our sellers in the office because we're comfortable. We know they're working. If you have really good outcome-based performance goals, you don't need to know what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And then ability to checkpoint how they're doing and where you can support them. So all of my attention is really centered around my team and not as much on me independently as a manager going to meet with customers. This is all about elevating my team to do and run with a full job.
So with the meetings that you do bi-weekly, is that more of a touch point, an opportunity for them to just give you any feedback or ask any questions? Or are you working through numbers, and are you working through where their different opportunities are at that stage?
It is more, so what I do is I have them, it's their agenda and it's their time. So so they bring to me what's top of mind or where they need help. There is a separate forecast and pipeline review call that happens once a month. And that's where we go into the specifics of the numbers, deal progress. But in those one-to-ones, we're inevitably talking about blockers or a situation where they need help. Maybe they need investment or pricing, lower price. Well, that's a whole nother process, and that we then initiate that. But I'm always looking for, do they have deal control? Are they progressing the deal? But the formal forecasting and pipeline review happens outside of the one-on-ones.
And that's once a month. So you say that the one-on-ones are 15% of a manager's time. What is the manager ideally doing to love their team in the other 85% of their time?
Yeah. So one of the things that managers need to do, obviously, I look at data and reports on my own outside of the one-on-ones. I'll ask questions. I'm also building relationships across the organization. I'm dealing with customer escalations. I have usually some relationships with customers where they ping me about different things. Either they're not getting what they need or they're frustrated with something. So I have that. The other thing, too, is coaching my team. So I mentioned briefly that if we need investment in the company, in our deal, in order to close the deal, there's a whole process where my seller gets in front of the deal review board, the top executive at Microsoft on the sales side, and asks for, makes the case, if you will, the business case for the investment. And what I do is I keep my camera off. I take notes in the background. And then when it's all done, I coach my seller. I don't want them to worry about action items. I want them to be present. So there's things like that go on. And in a large organization, a large company, there's a lot of internal alignment that's required. And so I also do a lot of that. I would say also the other thing is if I see emails going back and forth too much, I'll call a timeout and say, look, let's get on a call and talk about it. Because my view is email doesn't equal communication. And so I'm kind of looking at things and trying to make sure that I step in when I think things are going off the rails or if we can solve it more effectively by getting on a call.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have 17 crucial conversations that you're recommending. If you had to choose one, what's the one that has the biggest impact?
Well, I will say setting clear outcome-based performance expectations. Because if you don't have that and the seller doesn't know what's expected of them, everything else breaks down. And, that is, so there are hard numbers like make your quota, but there are soft things like build more relationships with executives in your customer, lead a strong cross-functional team. And I talk about what that means and what that looks like. And then we'll check point quarterly on how they're doing with their executive relationship building as an example. But if you aren't laying out what's expected, then I think it's really hard to hold them accountable and have them feel good about what they're doing. And that, by the way, that conversation comes after the initial one-on-one, and hopefully there's some relationship building because there are to make this system work, you have to have foundational skills of, I think, trust, transparency, caring for your team, things like that are crucial. And so there are skills needed in addition to to conduct successfully the 17 conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet. And when you're giving these clear outcomes that you're looking for, with each of them or just some of them, are you kind of diving down into some of the details? Like you mentioned, trying to, broaden your relationships within an organization. And what does that mean? Does that mean one relationship? Does it mean two? Does it mean five? How specific do you get? How far do you drill down into the activities that are needed for them to actually hit that quota or that number or close that sale that they're looking to close?
Yeah, great questions. So I'll start with the last one. I don't get into the activity at all when I set goals, they're all outcome. But outcome like achieving quota or closing a deal is a lagging indicator. So I do have, however, 3x pipeline coverage as a goal, and that's quantifiable. So in any given quarter, they have 3 times the pipeline they need to close, assuming we close 1/3 of the deals. Regarding the executive relationship mapping, I have a conversation with them about what good looks like, what's an appropriate expectation over, for example, the next 3 months. Building 2 new executive relationships or breaking into maybe a new line of business, the marketing department, perhaps, because historically we sell to IT. Well, we're busting that up. And so what are you going to do to get into, let's say, the marketing department or the HR department? So I make it tailored to them, and everybody has outcome-based goals. Everybody does. There's performance expectations. No one gets off the hook from having accountability to perform.
Yeah. That's important. So why don't you, I think this has been great and we're just starting, but how can people learn more about your book, learn more about what you're doing? Because this sounds like great stuff that sales leaders need to get a hold of. And everybody's a sales leader in my book.
Yeah. In fact, I've gotten actually asked to talk to general managers too of non-sales functions. So it's applicable more broadly. LinkedIn is the best way to catch up with me. I post about my book. That's a great place to find me. My book is on Amazon, so hardcover, paperback, Kindle, and I have an audiobook coming out, I think, before the end of January, but the publisher hasn't actually finalized the launch of the audiobook, but that will be coming out.
That's wonderful. Okay. So thank you very much, Helen. I appreciate it. And I encourage people to check out Love Your Team, a survival guide for sales managers in a hybrid world. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you liked the episode with Helen, please subscribe, leave us a comment or a rating. And don't forget our sponsor, Habitly.com, where you can learn the habits of highly successful people. You as an individual, your team, your company. The better behaviors you have, the more success and fulfillment you're going to have in what you do. And thanks again for joining us. Stay tuned. We have more great guests coming on, but bye for now.